There is a truth about money that most people never dare to consider, a truth so direct that the rational mind tries to dismiss it, yet so transformative that once understood, it reshapes the way you relate to abundance forever. Florence Scovel Shinn spent her life revealing this exact principle, offering a perspective that doesn't depend on chance, economic forecasts, or favorable circumstances. While the world often teaches that prosperity is earned only through exhaustion, competition, or being born into advantage, Florence insisted that the true engine behind every form of financial growth is the internal state a person occupies. She argued that wealth is not something you chase. It is something you become aligned with, something you allow, something you embody long before you see evidence of it in the physical world. And the moment you shift your identity, your reality begins to rearrange itself around that new inner certainty. People often ask why some individuals seem to attract opportunities without trying while others work tirelessly yet never seem to break through. Florence Scovel Shinn explained that the answer is never found in luck or privilege alone, but in the vibrational posture one maintains. Every assumption you hold about yourself silently shapes your life. If a person assumes that money is scarce, that prosperity is distant, that success is reserved for a select group, they end up reinforcing that narrative, internally and externally, without realizing they are doing so. But when someone assumes abundance as a natural state, even before having the evidence, the world begins to respond in unexpected ways. Not through magic, but through alignment, coherence, and inner authority. The concept of assumption is a cornerstone in Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings, and it goes far beyond wishing, hoping, or daydreaming. To assume is to embody. It means stepping into the emotional reality of the life you desire as if it already belongs to you. It is the difference between looking at a door and believing it might open someday, versus turning the handle and walking through because you already know it is meant for you. When you assume prosperity with confidence, not arrogance, but inner calm, you shift the quality of your thoughts, the tone of your inner voice, and the way you perceive possibilities. Suddenly, ideas you would have dismissed before become natural paths. People begin to speak to you differently. You carry yourself with assurance instead of anxiety, and this change in posture is felt in every room you enter. Florence often said that imagination is the divine tool every human possesses, and that the images held in the mind are far more powerful than most realize. She believed that imagination is not escapism. It is the blueprint of your future. When you visualize with sincerity and emotional richness, you are communicating with the deeper layers of your consciousness, the part of you that constructs your reality piece by piece. The key is not to imagine something distant or hypothetical, but to picture a scene that implies fulfillment, one that feels like an authentic memory of something you have already lived. Your subconscious responds not to logic but to feeling. When a person experiences a sense of relief, gratitude, or completion internally, the subconscious accepts that state as a command and begins shaping life to match it. Money, as Florence Scovel Shinn described, is not a mysterious force that appears out of nowhere. There are trillions circulating every day globally, flowing through businesses, investments, opportunities, exchanges, partnerships, and creative endeavors. The issue is not the existence of money. The issue is whether a person positions themselves vibrationally to receive it. Scarcity is not the absence of resources. It is the absence of alignment. Many individuals unknowingly reject opportunities because they do not believe they are capable, deserving, prepared, or confident enough. Every time someone says, "I can't afford it," "things never work out for me," or "money is always a struggle," they reinforce a self-image that pushes prosperity away. Not intentionally, but energetically. The mind is like a broadcasting tower, sending out signals through thoughts, emotions, and assumptions. Florence Scovel Shinn emphasized that these signals are creative forces, not passive ones. You are never thinking without consequence. You are sculpting your life with every belief you repeat, every limitation you protect, every fear you feed, and every possibility you refuse to consider. The moment you declare an identity, "I am struggling, I am unlucky, I am behind, I am not good with money," you instruct your subconscious to find ways to validate that story. And the subconscious always obeys. But the opposite is equally true. When you adopt the identity of someone who is naturally prosperous, even before evidence appears, you activate a different stream of experiences, insights, and connections. Prosperity begins in the unseen world before it moves into the physical. Florence explained that the invisible realm is not imaginary. It is the causal layer where everything is formed. You could think of it like the roots of a tree. You cannot see the roots growing underground, but everything that happens there determines what will manifest above the soil. Your internal state is the root system of your life. If the roots are built on anxiety, fear, lack, or resentment, the visible results will mirror that foundation. But when the roots are confident, expecting goodness, assuming abundance, and grounded in gratitude, the external world has no choice but to reflect that. Money flows where clarity and certainty reside. If you are unsure of what you want, the world remains unclear on what to deliver. If you believe prosperity is inconsistent, your results become inconsistent. If you assume abundance is your natural condition, then life begins to mirror that assumption through opportunities, ideas, invitations, and unexpected pathways. Some people call this luck, but Florence Scovel Shinn called it law, the law of assumption. She taught that the universe does not respond to desperation or wishing. It responds to identity, alignment, and conviction. When you adopt an inner attitude that prosperity belongs to you, not because you forced it, but because you aligned with it, a subtle shift occurs. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, choose differently. You stop chasing and start allowing. Your inner world becomes less frantic and more receptive. You start noticing possibilities that were always there but invisible to the version of you that believed in limitation. People are naturally drawn to someone who radiates peace instead of panic, confidence instead of confusion, grounded certainty instead of fragile hope. This is where transformation truly begins, in the decision to assume a new state, even if your outer circumstances have not yet caught up. Florence Scovel Shinn always emphasized that you do not wait for the external world to change first. You claim the new reality internally, and the outer world rearranges itself in response. The moment you accept that you are the source of your financial atmosphere, not the economy, not your upbringing, not your past failures, you reclaim the authority over your life. And once that authority is awakened, prosperity shifts from being a distant desire to becoming a natural extension of who you are becoming. Florence Scovel Shinn often said that every person is surrounded by an invisible field of expectation, and that this field acts like a magnet, pulling toward them whatever matches their dominant inner tone. Most people were conditioned from an early age to believe that good fortune is unpredictable, that financial ease is rare, and that wealth belongs only to those who work harder than everyone else. But Florence taught something radically different. That assumption is the bridge between what you desire and what you receive. Not the frantic effort, not the constant struggle, not the endless planning, assumption. The steady inner confidence that what you want is already moving toward you, even before you see a trace of it. And if this sounds too simple, it's because simplicity is often the last thing the human mind trusts. You can observe how this principle works just by looking at people in your own life. Those who constantly talk about their financial burdens seem to attract more bills, more setbacks, more unexpected expenses, almost as if life is confirming their beliefs in real time. Meanwhile, those who maintain a calm expectation of abundance, even if they start with less, often stumble into opportunities that appear tailor-made for them. Florence Scovel Shinn described this as the law of mental equivalence. Your experiences always rise to meet the level of your internal picture. If you hold an image of struggle, life reflects struggle. If you carry an inner image of expansion and prosperity, even when your wallet disagrees, the world reorganizes itself to match that internal state. What makes Florence's perspective so powerful is that she removes the idea of waiting for the perfect moment. Instead, she shows that identity creates momentum. A person who quietly assumes prosperity behaves differently from someone hoping that things might work someday. Their decisions have more courage. Their speech has more confidence. They stop apologizing for having dreams. They walk through life as though invisible doors will open for them, and often they do. This shift in posture is not arrogance, it is alignment. When your mind and emotions agree on abundance, your behavior naturally harmonizes with that state. And that consistency is what magnetizes results. But Florence Scovel Shinn also warned that the biggest barrier between a person and abundance is not scarcity, it is contradiction. People affirm abundance in the morning, but by afternoon they are speaking of fear. They visualize financial freedom at night, but during the day they obsess over bills. They imagine opportunities, but then they talk themselves out of every possibility because they don't feel ready. The subconscious cannot operate under mixed instructions. It responds to the dominant message, not the scattered ones. Florence insisted that clarity is kindness toward your own consciousness. You must decide what you believe and then hold that belief with steadiness, even when circumstances tempt you back into worry. One of her most transformative ideas is that money does not create freedom. Freedom creates money. A person who feels trapped, restricted, or limited vibrationally closes the flow of abundance. But someone who assumes freedom internally starts seeing ways to expand. They take steps they once delayed. They follow impulses they once ignored. They speak up when silence used to feel safer. They trust the intuitive nudges that Florence Scovel Shinn described as messages from a higher intelligence guiding you toward your rightful place. Prosperity does not come because you force it. It comes because you align with a version of yourself that welcomes it effortlessly. And contrary to what many people believe, you do not need to see a single sign before deciding to inhabit that state. Florence affirmed that the unseen world is always ahead of the visible one. Money that has not yet arrived physically may already be moving toward you through ideas, decisions, changes in people around you, or invisible shifts in the path your life is taking. You might not recognize the pathway until it becomes obvious, but the inner assumption begins the arrangement long before the outer event. This is why Florence emphasized acting from the end, not toward the end. When you operate from the version of yourself who already has what you want, your actions become precise and intuitive instead of anxious and scattered. There is something else she taught, that resentment, envy, and jealousy are some of the quickest ways to block prosperity. These emotions tell the subconscious that someone else's abundance is a threat, which means abundance cannot flow freely to you. Florence Scovel Shinn encouraged people to bless the prosperity they see in others as a reminder that abundance is circulating close by. She said that whatever you bless moves closer to you, and whatever you resent moves away. When you celebrate another person's success, you are declaring to your subconscious that wealth is safe, normal, and welcome. That shift alone dissolves years of internal resistance. As you deepen your understanding of these principles, you begin to notice how much of your old identity was shaped by cultural narratives rather than personal truth. You may have inherited beliefs from family, school, or past experiences that taught you to minimize your desires, downgrade your dreams, or brace for disappointment. But Florence Scovel Shinn insisted that your past has no authority over your present unless you continue granting it power. The moment you decide to embody a new inner standard, one of confidence, abundance, ease, and expectancy, life begins to reorganize around that decision. Not always immediately, but inevitably. Just as a compass needle realigns after being disturbed, your reality realigns once your consciousness stabilizes in a new direction. And now, before you continue absorbing these ideas, I want to speak to the person behind the screen. Yes, you. If you've been feeling something shift inside you as these words unfold, a quiet recognition, a spark of possibility, or even a sense of peace that you haven't felt in a long time, honor that feeling. That feeling is the beginning of your transformation. It's the part of you that already knows you're meant for more, that abundance isn't a fantasy but a rightful expression of who you are becoming. So if this message is resonating with you, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. Not out of obligation, but because you're choosing to stay connected to ideas that nourish your mind, strengthen your faith, and expand your sense of possibility. And after subscribing, leave a comment sharing something personal but simple. What belief about money are you ready to release today? Maybe it's the fear of not having enough. Maybe it's the habit of shrinking your desires. Maybe it's the belief that abundance is for others but not for you. Whatever it is, name it. Declare it. Release it. Your comment might become the reminder someone else needed to start shifting their own story. Florence Scovel Shinn believed deeply in community, in shared faith, and in the power of collective intention. When you speak your transformation aloud, you strengthen it, not only for yourself but for every person who reads your words. So go ahead, take that step. Allow this to be the moment you align with a new internal standard, one that welcomes prosperity instead of fearing it. Florence Scovel Shinn often described the subconscious mind as a fertile field that never questions the seeds planted in it. Whether you sow images of abundance or thoughts of limitation, the soil accepts everything without judgment and produces results that match the dominant pattern you impress upon it. This is why she emphasized the importance of guarding your inner life with the same attention you would give to something fragile and precious. Every assumption you repeat, every emotion you dwell on, and every internal posture you reinforce becomes a blueprint for the experiences that unfold in your physical world. Many people underestimate just how powerful this internal architecture is, thinking their outer conditions are fixed, when in reality, those conditions are reflections, mirrors, of deeper belief systems sculpted over years. One of the most profound shifts a person can make is understanding that the subconscious responds not to logic, but to feeling. You can say you want prosperity, but if the feeling underneath is fear or desperation, that emotional tone becomes the instruction that shapes your outcomes. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that you must speak the language of the subconscious, and that language is sensory. Vivid imagery, embodied emotions, small rituals of certainty, and mental rehearsing of the desired state. All of these serve as communication channels. When you imagine the future you desire with sensory richness, your subconscious begins interpreting that imagined experience as something already part of your identity. This is why athletes mentally rehearse their movements, why performers visualize their success, and why creators imagine the result long before it exists. They are training the subconscious to accept success as natural rather than exceptional. But Florence went even further by introducing the idea that assumption and imagination should not be occasional habits, they should be constants. You do not create abundance by a single moment of faith. You create it by stabilizing your entire inner world in the feeling of having what you want. This stability is not about denying challenges, but about refusing to let challenges dictate your identity. People often make the mistake of thinking that doubt is a sign they are failing. But Florence explained that doubt simply reveals old patterns being disrupted. The moment you aim for a new state of consciousness, the remnants of your previous mindset surface for release. It is not sabotage, it is cleansing. Only when you stop treating doubt as a problem and begin seeing it as a temporary echo of past conditioning can you move forward with calm determination. Another insight Florence Scovel Shinn offered is that money responds to certainty far more than it responds to effort. Effort alone, without inner alignment, produces exhaustion. But certainty, felt, embodied, and assumed, creates flow. People who embody certainty radiate a kind of inner permission. They walk into situations expecting them to work. They communicate with clarity instead of hesitation. They follow intuitive impulses without overthinking. They carry a financial identity that precedes the physical manifestation. Florence taught that this identity is what generates movement in the unseen realm, sending out a signal that reorganizes circumstances in ways the logical mind cannot predict. Money flows to clarity the same way water flows downhill. Naturally, inevitably, without resistance. Still, Florence knew that even with the best intentions, people sabotage themselves through habits that seem small but have enormous vibrational influence. Complaining about lack, obsessing over outcomes, comparing yourself to others, and replaying memories of failure. All of these are forms of energetic self-interruption. You may not speak the words aloud, but your emotional climate broadcasts them. And because you cannot out-earn or outwork the emotional climate you inhabit, these habits quietly interfere with the abundance seeking to reach you. Florence encouraged people to create internal rituals of realignment, not as superstition but as psychological hygiene. She recommended simple practices like pausing whenever fear arose, breathing into the sensation, and choosing a new statement of truth. I am guided. I am provided for. I am aligned with good. These small adjustments accumulate and form a new baseline identity. One of the most misunderstood aspects of manifestation is timing. People often expect instant results and interpret delays as failures. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that delays are rarely denials, they are rearrangements. When you assume abundance, a chain of events begins behind the scenes. Someone you need to meet begins moving toward you. A situation that no longer serves you starts dissolving. A new opportunity begins forming in a place you aren't yet aware of. The visible world is simply catching up with the invisible structure that is already changing. Florence compared this to planting a seed. You do not dig it up every day to check its progress. You trust the process and water it consistently. When a person adopts this kind of patient confidence, their entire energy shifts. They no longer oscillate between excitement and fear, they remain steady. Florence Scovel Shinn also taught that intuition is not random. It is the navigation system of your inner guidance. When you assume abundance, your intuition sharpens. You begin getting subtle nudges. Call this person, go to that place, try this idea, revisit that old skill. These impressions are not accidents. They are part of the bridge between assumption and physical manifestation. Most people dismiss these intuitive prompts because they seem too small or too unrelated to their financial goal. But often, the smallest intuitive action creates the largest ripple effect. Florence believed that intuition is the language through which the universe speaks directly to your subconscious. If you follow it consistently, you align with pathways you would never have discovered through logic alone. Something else that Florence emphasized is the importance of emotional neutrality. People mistakenly believe they must feel euphoric all the time to manifest abundance. But Florence taught that neutrality is far more powerful than forced positivity. Neutrality means you are not panicking, not doubting, not obsessing. You are calm, grounded, open, and waiting without tension. This emotional state allows the subconscious to operate without interference. It invites synchronicities because it is not contaminated by frantic energy. A neutral mind is a receptive mind, and a receptive mind is where breakthroughs occur. There is also a profound spiritual dimension to Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings. She believed that prosperity is not merely a financial condition. It is an expression of divine order. When you live in alignment with your higher nature, abundance flows as a natural consequence, not as a reward. She often reminded people that they are not separate from the source of their prosperity. They are expressions of it. When you act from this awareness, you stop begging life for scraps and start participating in the circulation of good. You stop clinging and start trusting. You stop fearing loss and start living from a sense of inner fullness. When you adopt this new consciousness, something remarkable happens. Your relationship with money changes entirely. Money stops being a source of stress and becomes a tool for expression. You begin making decisions based on expansion instead of fear. You stop shrinking your goals to match your circumstances and instead allow your circumstances to rise to match your identity. People around you sense the change, not because you brag about it, but because your energy becomes steady, confident, grounded. You no longer speak from desperation. You speak from knowing. This inner knowing is what transforms your entire life trajectory. Florence Scovel Shinn frequently reminded her students that prosperity is not something you pursue. It is something you rise into. This rising is not about climbing a ladder of effort or ambition. It is about elevating your inner stance, the quiet way you hold yourself in consciousness. Many people spend years trying to improve their financial situation from the outside in, focusing entirely on actions, strategies, hustles, and plans, while neglecting the inner world that silently determines the quality of everything they touch. Florence taught that money does not respond to strain. It responds to order, clarity, and alignment. When the internal world is disorganized, fearful, or chaotic, outer results reflect that turbulence. But when the inner atmosphere becomes grounded and deliberate, everything begins to stabilize. One of the most transformational ideas she shared is that every person carries an internal, financial thermostat, a subconscious ceiling that regulates how much prosperity they allow themselves to receive. This thermostat is shaped by childhood impressions, cultural narratives, personal experiences, and emotional memory. For example, some individuals unconsciously associate wealth with conflict, shame, loss, or unpredictability because of what they witnessed growing up. Others carry the belief that financial success must be earned through suffering, and therefore they reject opportunities that feel too easy or too aligned. Without realizing it, They sabotage the very abundance they're trying to attract. Florence Scovel Shinn encouraged her students to gently observe these internal limits, not with judgment, but with curiosity. The goal is not to shame the old pattern, but to recognize it and replace it with a new assumption. She explained that if a person raises this internal limit, if they begin to see themselves as someone who naturally handles prosperity with confidence, responsibility, and ease, their outer world adapts. They begin noticing opportunities they once ignored. They speak with more authority. They trust their decisions. They stop apologizing for wanting a life that feels abundant. They take actions aligned with expansion rather than fear. The universe does not withhold abundance. It simply mirrors the capacity one has built to receive it. Another key point Florence emphasized is that financial breakthroughs often occur after a person releases emotional entanglements from the past. Resentment, guilt, regret, and unresolved fear can weigh on the subconscious like invisible chains. These emotional burdens quietly disrupt the flow of abundance because they anchor a person to an identity they have already outgrown. Florence believed that forgiveness is not a moral exercise. It is an energetic one. Forgiving others and oneself clears stagnant emotional debris and allows new experiences to flow in with ease. When a person forgives, they are essentially saying, "I release the version of myself that lived in that old story." And that release creates space for a new identity, one that aligns with prosperity instead of suffering. Florence Scovel Shinn also taught that speech carries creative power. Words are not simply sounds, they are energetic declarations, instructions to the subconscious, and signals to the universe. When someone repeatedly says, "Nothing ever works out for me," or "I always struggle," or "I never have enough," they are casting votes for versions of themselves they do not actually want to be. She encouraged her students to speak from the identity they desired, even before seeing evidence. Statements like, "Everything I need arrives on time," "I am fully supported," and "prosperity flows through my life with ease," are not affirmations meant to convince the universe. They are affirmations meant to train the subconscious to see abundance as normal. But Florence was not naive. She knew people often try to use affirmations while still holding on to old fear-based identities. In those cases, affirmations feel hollow or ineffective. She explained that affirmations work only when the emotional tone behind them begins to shift. The words must feel believable, or at least possible. They must be accompanied by small internal adjustments in expectation, posture, and behavior. The goal is to align the emotional body with the intellectual intention. When the mind and the emotions agree, the subconscious accepts the new belief easily. One of her most striking insights was that fear itself is often nothing more than imagination used in the wrong direction. People imagine the worst outcome and then treat those imaginings as warnings rather than mental creations. Florence Scovel Shinn encouraged her students to redirect their imagination deliberately, using it as a tool of empowerment rather than self-sabotage. She believed that imagination, when harnessed intentionally, becomes a bridge to the unseen. It creates a vibrational signature that attracts experiences matching the emotional quality of the imagined scenario. A person who consistently imagines ease, abundance, and success begins to emotionally inhabit those realities long before they manifest physically. Another principle she taught is that the universe responds to expectation more rapidly than it responds to desire. Desire alone can sometimes reinforce lack, because wanting something intensely implies that you do not yet have it. But expectation, quiet, steady, confident expectation, is a declaration that the good you seek is already in motion. Expectation relaxes the nervous system. It dissolves resistance. It aligns the subconscious with a future that feels inevitable. Florence Scovel Shinn described expectation as a magnetic mood, one that draws experiences into alignment with it. When people shift from wanting to expecting, their energy transforms. Florence also spoke about the importance of emotional alignment when making decisions. She believed that intuition is the voice of the divine within, and that ignoring intuitive impulses is one of the ways people block their prosperity. When someone feels pulled toward an idea, a conversation, a collaboration, or an opportunity, but talks themselves out of it due to fear, they cut off the flow of abundance prematurely. Intuitive nudges often serve as stepping stones toward greater prosperity, even if they do not appear directly related to financial gain. Florence taught that each nudge, no matter how small, is part of a larger sequence that eventually leads to tangible results. She also emphasized that abundance is a circulation, not an accumulation. Money is meant to flow, to move through experiences, exchanges, generosity, and contribution. When people hoard money out of fear, they signal to the subconscious that the world is unsafe and unpredictable, and this creates stagnation. But when people engage in spending, saving, and giving from a place of confidence and openness, they reinforce the belief that resources are plentiful and replenishable. Florence Scovel Shinn believed that generous actions, when done from the heart, not from insecurity, activate powerful cycles of return. Generosity aligned with confidence reinforces an identity of abundance rather than scarcity. And perhaps one of her most comforting teachings is that prosperity does not require perfection. You do not need flawless thoughts or constant positivity. You only need consistency in your internal direction. If you drift into fear, you can recalibrate. If you slip into doubt, you can return to gratitude. If you feel overwhelmed, you can pause and breathe into alignment again. Florence always said that the universe is patient, and consciousness is forgiving. Every moment is an invitation to assume a higher state. Florence Scovel Shinn often explained that the path to abundance becomes much clearer when a person stops treating prosperity as something distant and begins relating to it as a natural extension of their identity. She believed that every individual carries a seed of wealth within them, not in the form of money itself, but in the form of consciousness, an inner template capable of attracting all necessary resources once correctly aligned. This shift in perspective dissolves the idea that abundance is an accomplishment and replaces it with the understanding that abundance is a state of being. When someone embraces this truth, their actions change, not because they are trying harder, but because they are expressing a more empowered version of themselves. One of her most powerful teachings centers on the idea that life rearranges itself the moment you decide to assume a new identity. Not when you earn it, not when you feel ready, not when conditions improve. When you decide. This decision is not merely intellectual. It is emotional, visceral, embodied. It is a declaration to your subconscious that the old version of you has completed its role, and a new one is emerging. Florence reminded her students that life does not require permission to change from the external world. It only needs permission from within. Once that permission is granted, everything begins to accelerate. Ideas come faster, opportunities feel closer, and your sense of possibility expands. Florence Scovel Shinn also taught that abundance has a rhythm, and when you align with that rhythm, your life unfolds with a sense of effortlessness that surprises you. This rhythm cannot be accessed through force, stress, or desperation. It requires both surrender and intention. Surrender is not giving up. It is letting go of the need to control every detail. Intention is not pushing. It is guiding your consciousness in a specific direction. Together, they create a harmonious balance where intuition leads and the mind follows instead of interfering. In this state, you move through the world with quiet conviction, trusting that you are supported even when you cannot yet see the full picture. Another profound insight Florence shared is that prosperity responds to inner spaciousness. When you clear mental clutter, fears, resentments, limiting beliefs, you create room for new experiences to enter. Most people are unaware of how crowded their inner world is. They carry old memories like heavy luggage, repeating stories of disappointment, replaying fears from years past, and clinging to identities built on struggle. Florence taught that these internal burdens must be released for abundance to flow freely. She encouraged simple practices such as intentionally choosing new thoughts, blessing past experiences, and consciously detaching from narratives that no longer serve. This is not denial. It is detoxification. As the emotional load lightens, the subconscious becomes more receptive, and prosperity begins to feel natural rather than forced. Florence Scovel Shinn also emphasized the subtle but powerful role of gratitude. Gratitude, as she described, is not merely appreciation, it is alignment. It shifts the emotional body into recognition of what is already working rather than focusing on what is missing. When you cultivate gratitude consistently, You send a signal to the subconscious that you are safe, supported, and ready to receive more. Gratitude dissolves resistance by softening the emotional landscape. It opens the door for abundance because it quiets the voice of not enough. Florence taught that gratitude is a magnet, pulling new blessings into your life while also revealing opportunities that were previously overlooked due to fear or distraction. Another cornerstone of her teaching is the concept of divine timing. Florence did not describe divine timing as waiting passively. Instead, she framed it as moving in harmony with your intuition and trusting the sequence of events that unfold. She explained that the universe often orchestrates circumstances in ways the logical mind cannot grasp, arranging people, ideas, and encounters that ultimately lead to the desired result. When someone tries to force an outcome prematurely, they disrupt the natural flow. But when they trust, act intuitively, and remain emotionally aligned, the pathway becomes smoother and more direct. What may appear as delays or detours often end up becoming essential parts of the larger manifestation. As the inner world shifts, the outer world begins reflecting that transformation with increasing clarity. People may treat you differently without fully understanding why. You might receive invitations or ideas that feel divinely timed. Financial opportunities may emerge from directions you never considered. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that these external changes are evidence of a deeper internal rewiring. They are not coincidences. They are confirmations. They reveal that the subconscious has accepted the new identity and is now guiding your life into alignment with that assumption. But Florence was clear about something else. Abundance is not meant to be hoarded. It is meant to be shared, circulated, expressed. When prosperity flows through your life, it becomes an opportunity to uplift others, expand your possibilities, and contribute in meaningful ways. Generosity anchored in confidence amplifies abundance rather than diminishing it. When you give from overflow rather than fear, you reinforce the belief that resources are replenishable and abundant. Florence taught that giving and receiving are two sides of the same energetic coin, and that a person who masters both becomes a true channel for prosperity. And now that you've reached this point of the journey, something important needs to be acknowledged. You are not the same person who began listening earlier. Something inside you has shifted, maybe subtly, maybe dramatically, but undeniably. You understand now that abundance is not granted from the outside. It emerges from within. You understand that Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings are not abstract. They are practical tools for reshaping your identity, dissolving old patterns, and stepping into a life that feels aligned with your true nature. You understand that prosperity is not something you earn through struggle, but something you allow through alignment. And with that understanding, it's time for a gentle invitation. If you felt your mind opening, your heart relaxing, or your sense of possibility expanding as these words unfolded, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. Do it as a symbolic gesture, a quiet declaration that you're choosing a new chapter, a new identity, a new relationship with abundance. And after subscribing, share your voice with us. Tell your story. Tell us what part of this message touched you the most. Tell us what belief you're ready to release or what new truth you're ready to assume. Your words may become the spark that ignites someone else's transformation. This community grows through shared experience, shared courage, and shared awakening. And before we close, reflect for a moment. What if this is the turning point? What if this is the moment your life begins expanding in ways you never expected? Florence Scovel Shinn believed that a single shift in consciousness can redirect an entire destiny. Allow yourself to feel that possibility. Allow yourself to receive the abundance that is already seeking you. Allow yourself to step fully into who you are becoming. The doors are open. The path is clear. And prosperity is already moving in your direction.